You're listening to I Love It When, and I'm your host, Mo. I'm a speaker, coach, and connector. You're in the right place if you're looking for some inspiration and you're ready to truly embrace who you are. My intention with this podcast is to help you see that you are so much more powerful than you realize. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of I Love It When. I'm your host, Mo, and today I'm excited to introduce you to Wil Johnson. I met Wil at a local networking group called Engage Snohomish. So I live just about 10 minutes from Snohomish in Everett, Washington. And I really enjoy going to networking meetings that are outside of the city that I live in because so much of the work I do doesn't require me to be in person, right? I work with people across the country and sometimes around the world. And I really enjoy that. And so I met Wil at this networking group, and he's the director of equity and inclusion for the Snohomish School District. And then about a week and a half later, we met again at a local event that was happening, a fashion show in downtown Everett. And we started chatting and really connected with him around having deep conversation, because I can no longer really have surface level conversation. I can do it lightly with networking events and things like that, but you know, you give me 5 minutes, and people joke about this with me, but it won't be long before I ask you a question that will just take us deeper, because I love that. That's what life is all about to me. And Wil was sharing about how the job that he does and how much of it just intertwines with what he's passionate about in life, period. And I totally resonated with that. That's very much why I'm doing what I do now, because it's intertwined in every part of my life. So here's the 411 on Wil. When there is a bridge that needs to be built, Wil Johnson finds a way. Wil's passion lies in making connections, whether it's between people, concepts, or navigating the path from problem to solutions. Wil currently serves as an education administrator and consultant, specializing in equity and inclusion. His professional background includes working as a behavior interventionist, special education teacher, debate and football coach, along with serving as a medical specialist in the Army. When not working to educate the world, Wil enjoys listening to music, traveling, and meeting new people. So here are some of the highlights of what we talk about in today's episode. We talk about the importance of creating space of belonging wherever we are. We talk about what's the motivation behind the behavior that leads to discrimination and exclusion in our communities. We talk about self-awareness and letting go of your ego. What else can we do as individuals to be more inclusive? And then I want to make sure to mention that Wil has a podcast coming out starting in December 2023 here. And he's also working on a book. And so I want to make sure I will link the website, the Snohomish School District website, in the comments in the show section. But be sure that you follow Wil either on Facebook or Instagram, and keep an eye out. I'll be sharing his podcast when it goes live. And I can't wait for you to hear this episode and enjoy this conversation. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of I Love It When. I'm really excited today to introduce you to a new friend of mine, Wil Johnson, who I met at a local networking group called Engage Snohomish. And so, Wil, I'm going to have you start off today by just introducing yourself and a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Oh, thank you. Glad to be here. As you mentioned, my name is Wil Johnson. I currently work as an equity director in a local school district. I've been an educator by trade for the past 14 years, got here by way of military, a couple other weird routes. So it definitely wasn't a smooth path, but one of the things I really try to do when I can is, even though I'm an introvert, claim to be, love connecting with people, hearing their stories, and helping them get from where they are to where they want to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when we met at the Engage Snohomish event, and then I saw you again a little bit later at another Everett event, I was like, oh my gosh, this guy has so much to share. There's so many different things and experiences that you've had. And I think I asked you, are you writing a book? And you were like, yes, I actually am. And I love that, because so many people have so many experiences that they don't really take the time to write down and share. And so I love that you're doing that. And so I did a little bit of research on you too, went on LinkedIn to see what I could find, and saw that you had written some articles and things like that. So I actually want to start off talking a little bit about what you mentioned, that you're an introvert. And because I saw one of the articles you wrote about was, am I an introvert, or was it, I think you said by design or by default?
Right.
So I wondered if you just start off by chatting a little bit about that, because that's, I think, well, there's so many different ways we could go with that conversation.
Right. And I'll start off with saying, for more information, buy the book when it comes out. But
Yes.
the article was really about me reflecting on my life because in the phase that I'm in now, I really feel like as a director, I have a voice. People
Hmm.
seek out my input. They want to hear from me, and that has not always been the case. You
Hmm.
know, when I was younger, I was this kid, no lie, because my mom actually has pictures of it, where we live near downtown Atlanta. I would take out this little chair, sit it on the corner with like a Sprite and a bag of Lay's potato chips, and I'm just sitting there eating my chips, drinking my soda, and watching everything that's happening at the laundromat and the convenience store across the street, right?
Uh-huh.
And so, you know, you watch stuff enough, you can say, oh, well, this person's going to do that. Here's how this is going to go down. And so I found myself at a very young age speaking in adult conversations, right?
Hmm.
And people are like, boy, what are you talking about? Why are you getting into grown folks' business? You acting like you're a grown man. And that was my nickname when I was a kid, man, you know? And I'm
Okay.
like, okay, well, folks don't want to hear what I have to say. So I'm just going to kind of back it up and not say anything, you know? And then, you know, I got into school and I often tell people, yeah, even in kindergarten, I was that little short, chubby kid. And, you know, some kids play with me, some kids not. And so I'm like, okay, so where do I fit in? Where do I belong? And I just, you know, really worked to find my tribe even back then, but I really just kept to myself and that small group of people. And
Hmm.
as time went on, I was in like accelerated classes. So, you know, in elementary school, it's not cool to be smart. In high school, it's not cool to be smart. So I
Hmm.
was a kid that used to kind of draw and keep to myself. I played football, but, you know, for the most part, it was just me and my little group. Um, and so, yeah, again, it wasn't until recently where I feel like I actually found my voice. But when I was in college and I was learning about being an introvert or an extrovert, and it's like, well, I'm not shy, but I
Hmm.
definitely feel like I recharge by myself because sometimes extended interactions with large groups of people can just drain my energy.
Hmm.
And so when I wrote the article, whether it's by design or by default, was I naturally an introvert, or was this a response to the way my voice had been silenced or I felt unheard for so many years?
Hmm.
Yeah.
I love that. What do you still can then consider yourself an introvert now then, truly?
I think it's maybe more of the ambivert or omnivert version
Yeah.
because this is now the third podcast I've been featured on. I have my own podcast getting ready to come out. I
Hmm.
constantly do presentations at schools, at community events. Like you mentioned, you met me at a community event. And so I
Yeah.
was like, hey man, Will's out in all these spaces. Is he really an introvert? And at the same time, I do feel like I recharge when I'm at home listening to music, maybe taking a solo road trip.
Hmm.
And then I also find myself sometimes missing people and
Hmm.
wanting to engage in some way. And like I mentioned, I
Hmm.
enjoy meeting new people. And
Hmm.
so there is something there still about getting out and being engaged with folks.
Hmm. Well, I love that you bring up and what you're doing from what you just shared there, storytelling. That's something that my partner Tom and I talk about a lot, and how much storytelling has a place in building bridges and connecting with other people, connecting with people you don't know. And so I love that. I can see that image. I have that image now of you in my head, sitting on the corner, just watching people and observing and creating stories, and also just watching the stories unfold. So
Right.
I love that you're going to start a podcast as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you
Yeah,
know
we,
what the intention, or what's your kind of the story behind the podcast going to be?
well, I'm glad that you asked because I'm enjoying getting to talk about this more. You know, so going back to your question about me being an introvert, I do
Hmm.
feel like, and maybe even the shy portion of it or finding my voice, I do feel like often I have these big ideas and then I don't share them because I don't feel like people either want to hear them or that they won't go anywhere.
Mm.
And so for almost, well, about a year now is when I first started talking about it. As I mentioned, I work in Snohomish. Okay.
Hmm.
And with the way I get out and connect with people folks are like, oh my God, well, so many people. Are you from here? And I'm like, nah, this isn't my home, but it's at home-ish. And
Mm-hmm.
people are like, oh, that's so cool, because that's like Snohomish, at home-ish. I'm like, yeah, exactly. That I meant to do that. And so someone's like, you ought to put that on a t-shirt. I'm like, well, yeah, that's actually what I'm planning on doing. But the podcast is going to be the At Home-ish podcast,
Mm-hmm.
and it's about creating spaces where we belong. And so the logo says At Home-ish, and it's where we belong, because where do you feel like you belong the most? At home. And if
Mm-hmm.
we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion to create spaces of belonging, we want people to feel like they belong
Mm-hmm.
wherever they are.
Mm-hmm.
Do I belong when I go to the store? I belong when I walk down the street? Do I belong in
Mm-hmm.
this community that I've never been in before?
Mm-hmm.
If I don't feel like I belong, why is that? And what do we
Mm-hmm.
need to do to repair that, whether that's internally looking at our own feelings or the environment, and what needs to happen to ensure the environment's more welcoming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so with the
Yeah.
podcast, there'll be some that I do on my own, where it's
Mm-hmm.
really just some instructions around what is diversity, equity, and inclusion. How do we do the mirror work and look at ourselves and understand how we show up? What does it
Mm-hmm.
mean to be self-aware? What does it mean to be open to learning about others? So those would be some of the solo ones, but then also inviting people in to share their stories, to really have some courageous conversations about, okay, so what was your experience when you went into this neighborhood? Or what
Mm-hmm.
was your experience when you started in this type of work? Or when
Mm-hmm.
you went to this organization? Because there are places where, if we're being truly honest with ourselves, oh well, yeah, I can't go there. I don't feel like I would belong in that space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It reminds me of, again, part of your article. It might have been in the introvert article or the next one that I read, where you talked about how you were getting ready to go out for a walk, and then you all
Mhm.
decided not to go out for the walk because you weren't
Yeah.
sure if it was safe. And I think it's a conversation that so many people kind of avoid having because they don't know how to talk about it or what to say, or and it's also just sad that that's the truth for so many people, that there's certain places where it just doesn't feel like it's a safe spot for you to just go for a walk.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that was a very interesting time, because that would have been right around May, if not June of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm originally from Georgia, as I mentioned. And so right around that time on the news, I remember hearing about Ahmaud Arbery, who was shot and killed while jogging through this neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I walked through a neighborhood where there's not a lot of people who look like me. Matter of
Mm-hmm.
fact, I had met a guy. This would have been early last year, but he said he knew when I moved in 4 years ago, because there's only like four Black guys in the community where I live.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm the only one that lives there. The other three just kind of work and they get in and get out. I'm like, oh, wow. I hadn't noticed, because my pattern had been work, home, and not really being in the community much, except for walking around when I do. But
Mm-hmm.
when Ahmaud Arbery was shot, I really questioned if I was safe walking in my neighborhood. I actually had an
Mm-hmm.
experience when I first moved there, where someone yelled out a racial slur at me as they were at the intersection right by where I lived. And I'm like,
Wow.
wow, am I safe here? You
Mm-hmm.
know? And then also, that same time was the start of COVID,
Mm-hmm.
near the start of COVID. And so it's like, well, when you go out, you're supposed to have a mask on. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's like, so let me get this straight. I'm this 300-pound, almost 6 foot Black man walking around this community where a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people don't look like me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'm safe in that regard, but now you also want me to walk around with a mask on, and so I was like, ugh. So let me stay at home and put on 20 pounds, because I'm not going outside and exercising.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So then are you going to be having a lot of like local people on your podcast, or is it going to be also people from across the nation, or?
Yeah, it's gonna be local and across the nation.
Okay.
Whoever I can get on board, I might have you on there one day.
Shoot. Okay. I love that. I'm super excited to listen to it. I think that especially, um, Just thinking about my local city myself, living in Everett, Washington, and I grew up in Seattle and then moved a little bit north here to Everett, and it's so different to see how different cities work, how different
Right.
places look. And I know that there are so many more people of color in the city of Everett than what we see on a day to day basis in downtown Everett. And so, actually, something that Tom and I have been talking about a lot is how do we get more people of color to come down into downtown and participate in all the events that are happening and all the things that are going on? How do we make it feel safe? How do we make it feel inviting?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big conversation. Is that part of why you call yourself a master bridge builder?
That is part of it for sure. And that part of it specifically is we're currently not in a space where a lot of people feel safe to be
Mm-hmm.
in certain places or at certain times. And so I would look at that as where we currently are. And now what's the bridge to get to where we want to be? What does
Mm-hmm.
that look like? And what does it
Mm-hmm.
take what are the construction materials for this bridge? And so
Mm-hmm.
some of that is, well, we need to make sure if we're building this bridge that it's safe over here. So now
Mm-hmm.
what is the culture of the community where we can say, oh yes, this is a welcoming, safe space. We're responsive when and if something negative happens, because that's one of the big
Mm-hmm.
concerns. Oh, I'm not going to go there because if something negative happens, no one cares, no one's going to do anything, no one's going to say anything. So how do
Mm-hmm.
you, one, address the negative things that either are currently happening or have happened? How do we communicate who people are who are in those spaces currently? So now we're working on this side, but when we actually talk about the construction of that bridge, what is it that I need to work on within myself to say, I feel comfortable and confident. I'm not crossing this bridge from a place of fear to where now perhaps I'm looking for something wrong, or
Mm-hmm.
based on my stress and anxiety that I'm harboring, it now impacts my behavior in a way that now doesn't allow me to engage when I cross this bridge. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's work done on both sides, and that's a part of the whole master bridge builder identity. But it also stems from, I can't remember, I think it's a short story about a bridge builder. And what the story is, there's an older guy who is going on this long journey and he comes to this ravine and there's like a creek at the bottom of the ravine and he works to get across it. And then it's like late in the evening when he finally gets across it. Once he gets across, he begins constructing a bridge back to the other side. And people on the other side are watching him like, well, what are you doing? It's like, well, I'm building a bridge for the next person to come through so they don't have to go through what I did.
Mm-hmm. I love that. It's such a leading by example too, showing people
Yeah.
how yeah, I definitely feel like that's been part of my role or part of my I guess mission. I feel like, and not only I think you and I talked about this a little bit. I feel like so much of my business and what I do is it's completely intertwined with my personal, like I am doing what I'm passionate about, which is um basically being love as much as I can be, which to
Right.
business people sounds so anti-business, but I believe it's actually 100% how business should
Mhm.
be and what it should be all about. And a lot of it requires stepping into courageous, I like how you called it, courageous conversations, and talking about things that might make you uncomfortable and helping people understand that those uncomfortable conversations is actually exactly where we need to go.
Mhm.
Yeah. Let's rewind a little bit back to your story about what brought you to Snohomish, Washington, and the job that you're at.
Oh, wow. Okay. So what brought me to Washington initially from Georgia? I was in the Army. I was stationed in Alaska for a number of years, stationed in Texas for a number of years, and I pretty much decided, okay, I love Alaska, but it was cold. I like Texas, but it was hot. Give me somewhere in the middle. And so I wanted to be either in Washington or in Oregon, and so ended up here in the Washington area. As far as getting to Snohomish, when I backed into education, as I like to call it. It's a longer story, but I worked as a paraeducator in a special ed program. working one-on-one with a student who had some he was autistic and had some behavioral needs. Okay. And so it was really interesting to me because coming out of a communications program, that was my undergrad, I was looking at this student in a sense of, well, he's communicating through his behavior, and the staff isn't listening for whatever reason, or do we have the capacity to listen? So how do we now work with the student in a way where he can communicate, we can respond to minimize these negative behaviors? Okay.
Mhm.
Immediately, the special ed director's like, well, you need to get your teaching cert. And I'm like, okay. So then I get my teaching cert. So then I'm working with a classroom of students who have, whether it's academic needs, behavioral needs, social needs, and I'm working to meet them where they are to help them to develop the skills so they can be successful.
Mhm.
Within 2 years, I have another district administrator coming to me like, oh man, you need to be a principal now. And I'm like, wow. So I went from being a paraeducator to you wanted me to run a school. Okay. Now, granted, some life things happened, so I didn't jump right into a program then. So I spent some more time with special ed. Um, and that's where I ended up taking a job where I was a behavior interventionist. So I was working at the middle school and the high school. And the idea of the job was that I was going to support staff and students around how we create those spaces of belonging and support and making sure the students are successful. But with some of the needs, it was primarily focused on students,
Mhm.
which was a need, but it's like we can't just look at the students as what needs to change. We have to adjust what we're doing. We're the
Mhm.
adults, we have the capacity, they're learning and growing. How do we now modify what we do to still have these same standards and expectations to help them reach these goals, but support them and meet them where they are? And so that's when I really had the realization that if I wanted to improve my capacity for change, that I needed to pursue a district level opportunity. And so from there, I became a special ed administrator with the Edmonds School District. Then COVID hit, and
Oh,
that was
wow.
that was a kind of crazy town. But then going back to what I was saying about Ahmaud Arbery, and that was around the same time that George Floyd was killed and Breonna Taylor
Mhm.
was killed, and the whole world is crazy around racial equity and inclusion. And I'm like, okay, let me get after this now. Let me jump off into this realm because I really view discriminatory or exclusive practices as a behavior. And so I'm really in this role looking to unpack what's the motivation of the behind the behavior that leads to discrimination and exclusion in our communities.
Wow. So, when you think about creating a safe environment, like you've talked about, and like what you've done in your classrooms, and I'm sure what you do in your workplace now, how could you describe for people listening what that's like, or how do you go about creating a safe environment?
Again, just really trying to meet people where they are.
Hmm.
So when I walk into a room, I don't know anything about the people right in front of me,
Hmm.
but just like you did for a quick second, I smiled.
Hmm.
And a smile just really opens up the door.
Hmm.
And it's like, well, hey, how's it going? And listening to the tone, listening to the body language, and then just work to spend time connecting with that person. I love
Hmm.
what you're saying about having love in the workplace. That's also another
Hmm.
project I'm working with. But how do we show love? How do we be fully present with a person? How do we, show them we appreciate them for who they are? I'm like, I may not be in need of anything specifically from that person, but I'm
Hmm.
honoring and valuing them as a person in that space.
Hmm.
And I feel from there, um, people begin to see me as someone who they feel they can trust, they can open up to. And,
Hmm.
it's not going to happen day one where, oh, Will's coming in, he's solving all the problems. But
Hmm.
now is where it's season three, as I like to call it. People are like, hey, I'm gonna just reach out to him because yes, he's a district administrator,
Hmm.
but he's approachable and he'll either have the answer or he'll be connected to someone who does have it and we
Hmm.
and we get things done.
Hmm. This is why I love that you're having a podcast because uh, I definitely identify with creating, like doing my best to create safe spaces, not only in my podcast, but also when I teach workshops or I do retreats, because it reminds me of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If we, how can we talk about anything if people don't feel safe physically or mentally or emotionally in the space that they're in? And I think this kind of information, this kind of conversation about creating safe spaces isn't really talked about.
Right.
I mean, I remember it was never talked about in high school or any place where learning was taking place. And I
Mhm.
think if more and more people heard that, which seems so basic, but at the same time, a lot of people don't know it. If
Mhm.
they were aware of it and kind of aware, and like you said, and put into a place where they really had to be present with themselves, I think then they would recognize more of their behavior and think about where it's coming from. It's super
And
powerful.
I don't know how much younger you are than me.
I'm 42.
Oh yeah, so I got 8 years on you almost. Um, but I remember, yeah, we did not learn about this in school. And the first time I heard about Maslow's hierarchy of needs that I recall, because okay, sometimes I didn't always pay attention in school, but the time that I remember hearing about it was when I was studying psychology after being in the Army when I returned to a community college. Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm at Pierce College taking the psychology class, and I'm like, oh, well, that makes a lot of sense. But
Mm-hmm.
then once I got into education, so here's shout out to all the educators out there. I
Mm-hmm.
actually have seen it more prominent across classrooms and districts since I came into education back in 2009. Okay. And so it is showing up and people are paying attention to needs. And so, oftentimes in schools, if there's like a breakfast program,
Mm-hmm.
historically it's like, well, you get lunch, you do breakfast on your own. But
Mm-hmm.
knowing that kids are showing up to school and they've not had breakfast, well, that's a need. That's a physical need. They need food.
Mm-hmm.
So let's make sure
Mm-hmm.
we feed them to start the day.
Mm-hmm.
Security measures around school. Let's make sure they're safe, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then, from there it goes into because there's the physical, there's a biological needs, then there's the physical safety, and then the
Mm-hmm.
third level is sense of belonging. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so in our society right now, it's like, you mean to tell me all we're really focusing on is belonging, this third tier of the 5-tier pyramid? Because then from after belonging, there's self-esteem, there's self-actualization. And if you go to the Snohomish School District website, go to the equity and inclusion homepage, the plan's laid out right there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because in when it comes to equity in education, it's about, are we meeting the needs of our students? For me, that was a natural connection to include Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for anyone who has dabbled in the diversity, equity, and inclusion circles, there's so much controversy around, well, who actually created the pyramid? And then there's also talk around the pyramid that was created by the Blackfoot people, okay, that actually has self actualization, the top of Maslow's pyramid, as the bottom of the pyramid, okay.
Okay.
And so the goal then is to, here's self actualization as at the bottom, but then there's cultural actualization. So who are you as an individual? What are you
Mm-hmm.
contributing? Who are we as a community and what are we contributing? And then the top of the pyramid is cultural perpetuity.
Mm-hmm.
So to say all of that in a very short and simple statement, how are we meeting the needs of our learners to create a sustainable society?
Wow. I'm gonna have to go check out the website now.
Check it out.
Yeah, yeah. That's fascinating. I hadn't heard that before.
Well, and that's the thing, because and it's funny you say that because this goes back full circle to the introvert by design or by default. Because
Mm-hmm.
when my Facebook memories pop up, there are things that I've worked on talking about for years, but
Mm-hmm.
because I was a paraeducator, people didn't listen. Because I was a teacher, people weren't listening. I mean, don't get me wrong, my inner
Mm-hmm.
circle, they were listening. They're like, Will, why aren't you like filling up arenas and hanging out with like the Secretary of Education or something like that? I'm like, I don't know, because I'm trying to get the message out there. But it's like once I became a director, once I was now in this role, it's like
Mm-hmm.
people are now listening and reaching out, which I'm like, it's great, and let's just get this done.
Mm-hmm.
you know. So
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't surprise me that people haven't heard it,
Mm-hmm.
uh, because it's just now really getting traction and getting out there. And I actually have heard some other diversity, equity, and inclusion consultants saying, "Hey, we need to switch more into love and understanding as opposed to beating people up with knowledge."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to make a note about looking that up now. Hey, I'm popping in for a moment to let you know that if you're interested in working with me one on one in a small group, or you'd like to attend one of my upcoming retreats, please reach out or add yourself to my email list. You can go to iloveitwhen.org and scroll to the bottom where you'll see there's a spot to sign up. I also love to speak, teach, and create experiences for small, medium, or large size companies. If you know someone that I should know, please connect us. I'm looking to utilize I Love It When to create global change, and that will require collaborating with all of you. You're all so much more powerful than you realize. Remind yourself of that today. Okay, I want to jump into a little bit about intuition and using your intuition. And I'm curious, based on what you've talked about so far and the little bit that I know about you, I already know that you're quite intuitive. And I'm just wondering, I ask this of all of my guests that come on and talk, because I talk a lot about intuition and hearing your true self, your true voice, or whatever you want to call it. And so I'm wondering how you define intuition and how that plays a role for you.
Well, and it was interesting, going back to the conversation we're having about being a bridge builder. There's a
Mm-hmm.
bridge in the background up there. I see it, like pointing somewhere, but
Mm-hmm.
but when I think about intuition, it's really about having a clear understanding of where we are, where I am, and where I want to be. And I feel like for years I've been able to just kind of have those mental connections or visualizations to here's how this is going to play out. Here's what we need. Here's the direction to go. My struggle, as I mentioned, has been not feeling like my voice was heard at the table. So I didn't always say things. And then to watch things play out, it's like, whoa, I was right on that. Or I knew that was going to happen that way, or I knew that's what was needed. Why don't I speak up more? And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, intuition is just being able to connect the dots from where we are to those points in the future that we're trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love
And
that.
and when I've taken those personality tests, I am a strong I. One
A
time I took
strong
it
eye.
at like 100 on I. I'm like, I am 100% intuitive. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Do you feel like, have you used it for different steps in your journey? Like, did you just know when something was for you, when a certain opportunity was calling you, or feeling like you knew what step to take next, even if it wasn't explainable or logical?
I think when I open myself up to that, because
Mm-hmm.
um, I when I was younger, I would say I was a bit of a perfectionist.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I didn't have it clearly outlined of what it was and what it looked like, I often wouldn't do it, even if I'm hearing all the voices saying, go, 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 go. But in more recent years, I've been like, after having some setbacks, some typical life setbacks, I feel it's like, okay, what have I got to lose? I'm hearing this, I'm feeling this, and this is what I'm going to move forward with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I know we were just talking about the I for into intuition, but the rest of that, my profile has mostly been INTJ, which is intuitive, introverted, thinking, judging.
Yes. Yeah. That's like the Myers-Briggs assessment, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. I'm an INFJ. And so
Eh,
fairly similar. Yeah.
yeah.
It's interesting that process, like you talked about at the beginning and mentioned building self-awareness, that process of creating more self-awareness. How have you found, or like what do you suggest people do to start to build more self-awareness? Or is that something that you talk about when when you've talked on other podcasts and just in your job and what you do?
Well, I think one of the one of the things that's been most beneficial for me is separating myself from my ego.
Mm-hmm.
Because oftentimes we're so concerned about am I fitting in, or how am I showing up? And it's like, stop worrying about how you're being perceived and be you.
Mm-hmm.
What are you feeling? Who are you authentically? And the thing that really stands out to me when we talk about inclusion, if we feel like we can't be our true selves, or we have to put on a mask to show up in a certain space, we don't have inclusive spaces. And
Mm-hmm.
so that self-awareness is, okay, who are you when you're in the car singing your heart out to your favorite song? Who
Mm-hmm.
are you when you're sitting at home on the couch, like, I want to fill in the blank?
Mm-hmm.
Who is that person? What is it that brings you joy? What is it that brings you happiness? And is that the person that gets to show up in the various spaces of your life? And if not, what does that take? Is it taking a change of location? Does it take a conversation with people to work to design the space that we want? Because sometimes we are in spaces sometimes that don't change, and we don't
Mm-hmm.
have the capacity to change it. And then that requires us to make a decision. But for our happiness, our well-being, we have to make that decision.
Mm-hmm. What do you think it is that's helped you to develop the level of self-awareness that you have? Is there something in particular, or is it just the process of going through your journey?
It's the process. It
Yeah.
wasn't like an overnight thing. It's been, a couple hard knocks on the head. You fall down, you bruise yourself a little bit, and you're like, "Ooh, that hurt." Okay, I'm not doing that again. What is it that I want to feel? What is it that works for me? Let me dust myself off, and I'm going to go and be that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the simplest forms I can think of is even like with interpersonal relationships. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like you have your friends that have known you for years, and then you're dating somebody, and then it's like, oh, you acting different. Why are you acting different around this person than you typically do with us? It's like, thank you for saying that in the beginning. If you do, friends typically don't. So friends, please speak up. But it's like, you notice someone changing, call them back and be like, hey, are you aware of what you're doing? And are you being your true self? Because if you being somebody fake, phony, whatever, or just you're trying to win this person's love and affection, is
Yeah.
that sustainable? Is that who you are and who you're gonna be 5, 10 years down the road?
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, that was a realization in that aspect of my life. I'm single now, yay. But but it's like, realizing that in my life where I'm like, oh, I need to be my authentic self in my interpersonal relationships. How now am I myself in multiple settings in my life? Can I
Mm-hmm.
go to work and have conversations that truly represent who I am? And it hasn't always been easy. I had some
Mm-hmm.
conversations just this year where people are talking about concerts they've attended, you know, and most people in my office don't look like me. So if I'm hearing like, oh yeah, I went to see Elton John, I went to see Bon Jovi, I went to go see Guns N' Roses, and I'm like, yeah, I went to go see 50 Cent and Busta Rhymes, and I'm watching Wu-Tang Clan and Common. Who's that? Yeah, that's why I didn't say who they were, because we all know these other people. But I have gotten better about saying, yeah, here's what I'm doing, here's who I am, and it just
Mm-hmm.
feels so much better, and helps me to feel like I belong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As you were talking about that, I was thinking there's so many different opportunities for people to take steps towards being inclusive, whether they're in their own community or their job or wherever they go throughout the day. And so I often talk to people about how I love helping people realize their power. I think that's one of the things I love to do is helping people understand what they're capable of. And by that, I mean, not even like what could you accomplish in your job or your life before you die, but more like uh, how much power you have when you go to the grocery store and how you interact
Mhm.
with people on a daily basis. And so I talk a lot about how the little things that people do really do make a difference and really do change. Because I think by helping people recognize that, then they'll actually start to do more throughout the day and
Mhm.
everywhere where they're at to make those little changes. Um, yeah, so I guess I'm wondering, is there something that you recommend people do, or what are some? Do you have any tips for people as they're working to be more inclusive wherever they go that they could do? Because I think people look at this, and when I've talked to people about this topic, they're like, "But what could I do? There's nothing I could do that would really make that big of a difference."
Hmm.
And it's just not true.
Right, exactly. And I think that the biggest thing is it still circles back to understanding ourselves and who we are.
Hmm.
Most people that I've come across who say they don't feel like they have a voice in the conversation are of European descent.
Hmm.
Okay. And I use that term very intentionally.
Hmm.
This is where I get in trouble. I know, because um, just the concept of white
Hmm.
or black,
Hmm.
that's not an ethnicity. That's not a place of origin.
Hmm.
It is something that was designed with a purpose in mind.
Hmm.
Okay. And so what I often ask people to fully explore is where are your grandparents, your great grandparents from? Where are you from? Because some people are even, new to this country themselves. And let's talk about the parts of your identity that you may not publicly show for whatever reason. So maybe someone doesn't want someone to know, oh, I was from this country, or my family, was poor or is poor. We
Hmm.
hide these things. Let's stop for a second. Let's stop again, let go of that ego. Let's stop hiding those parts of our identity and
Hmm.
be open to those and engage in conversation and understanding that we all have different ways that we are included or excluded, and that helps us to be a part of the conversation.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I love that. There are things that absolutely everybody hides. There feels like they have to hide something.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so how do we get to that point
Hmm.
where we don't have to be hidden?
Hmm.
Which is just so like when I was thinking through this over the past couple of years, it's like, wow, that's so scary, but also freeing at the same time.
Yes.
It's like I can just be me.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. I definitely resonate with for a long time being, I think I resonate with you feeling like I'm in a bit of an ambivert, like definitely recharge my batteries being alone, but at the same time I can be social and I love connecting with people.
Yeah.
Um, but I really didn't feel like I started to truly be myself until the last probably 8 to 10 years. And when you're not being yourself and you're going around and you have kind of this friction between who you truly are and who you're presenting to the world, it takes so much more energy to put that persona out there rather than to just be. So, like you said, the freedom that you feel from letting go and just letting it and letting yourself be out there. It's not only the freedom piece, but it's the look at all this energy then you then have to go do something with. Something.
Right? So much
Yes.
more energy.
Yes. Yes. Well, cool. Well, is this kind of what you've talked about with your podcast too? Is this similar to what you're going to be or what you are writing about with your book?
Mhm.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, because again, how do we create those spaces of belonging?
Hmm.
Really digging in and knowing that it means different things for different people.
Hmm.
And again, maybe I'm in a space where I, at the surface, don't feel like I belong, but what is it for me at that time that's making me feel that way? And how can I now navigate that? See, now I'm jumping off into some behavior chain type of stuff to where it's like, there's something here that makes me not feel like I belong.
Hmm.
Okay, why? Is it
Hmm.
based on personal experience? Is it based on something you've read about, something you've heard about?
Hmm.
Is there a way to respond to this situation differently to where you now create a space where you belong? Does that make
Hmm.
sense?
Hmm.
Because I think about times where I'll go with a super surface level thing real quick.
Okay.
So there are people who, when we talk about Snohomish County,
Hmm.
it has a higher population of people of European descent, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so there are people who may be of African descent or Mexican descent who, if there aren't people who look like me there, I
Hmm.
don't belong there.
Hmm.
And that's not necessarily the case. That's a perception that's rooted in history. It's perpetuated in the media, And can we say, hey, I've been to this community, I've interacted with people, and then base our feelings or our actions off of our personal experiences as opposed to things that have just been handed down to us.
Hmm.
Yeah. It gets pretty complicated, but that's the way I feel that we can really work to have those spaces for belonging and have more of our own self-awareness to show up as who we are.
Hmm. I love that. So you had mentioned to me before we started recording today that you actually don't work directly in a school like day to day, but you work in the district office. Do you find like, what does your job entail then on a weekly basis?
Oh, that's a good question. So on a weekly basis, I do work to get out in the schools. I really do work to connect with our building administrators, with our teachers, interact with students, visit classes. I'm out in the community at events to really get a pulse on the community and make connections and um, other, phone calls, emails, that typical type of stuff. I do trainings for our staff.
Okay.
I go to student group meetings. Just really being visible. And I love to say to folks that I see myself as a thought partner,
Hmm.
as someone who, come to me with what you're thinking or what questions you have, and I will help you work through those things. So again, being a bridge builder, being
Hmm.
helping to build community. That's what
Hmm.
I spend most of my days doing.
I love that. Do you have, for some reason, I feel prompted to ask you this. Do you have like a future vision for yourself with this role? Or is this kind of like as far as you see right now, or you're just kind of in this moment of where you're at?
So the current trajectory, I'm basing a lot of our work right off of the standards that were provided by the state.
Okay.
And so I'm walking our staff through those standards to where the first one is understanding self and others. So asking those questions about who am I, how am I showing up, and who are the people around me. The next phase is student, family, and community engagement. So now that I understand better who I am and who others are, how are we now engaging in this work of supporting one another and working with one another? And going into the concepts of the engagement continuum, which we can talk about at another time. But
Mm-hmm.
from there, jumping off into learning partnerships. So let's back it up. I know who I am now. I'm aware more of who others are. We have a level of engagement that's appropriate for what we're trying to accomplish. Now, how do we reach out intentionally and partner with people to improve our collective learning? Okay. So then after building our collective learning, the next phase is leading for educational equity. We've done this work. How now do we leverage these partnerships to be leaders in this work? And the quick summary of this was when I spoke with someone a couple months ago, and I told them that I was doing this diversity, equity, inclusion work in Snohomish. They're like, "Oh, wow, I bet that's a hard job." And I'm like, "Really? So what are your perceptions of my community?" It's like it sounds like you have a little bit of you're showing a little bit of bias if this is what you feel about this area that I'm working in because I love my job. I love the people I get to work with. I love what I get to do. But my goal, and I'm being really clear in saying this, I want this community to be the example of what work we need to do in our communities to have those communities of belonging, if that makes sense. Because a lot of the research that's currently out there are rooted in urban centers where there's a lot more ethnic diversity. It's like, well, we need to do this, we need to do that. Okay, here's the money and the resources to impact the people who have been negatively impacted by this for whatever number of centuries. Okay, but you get further away from those areas where there's less surface level diversity, as I like to call it, but we still all have different needs. How are we embracing diversity in those communities where this isn't the primary issue? And so, what I really hope to create in the next 3 to 5 years is that formula, basically, that we can use in the parts of our country that people may not feel like they belong.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. For people that want to follow along with your journey and your podcast, what's the best way for them to do that? Do you have like an email list or something?
Oh, I like that. I'm still so new at this, but the podcast, the guy I'm working with, it'll be on Spotify, it'll be on iTunes, and just look for the At Homish podcast. We've only recorded one draft episode so far. I need to go back in the studio and do some editing, but I would say that it would be released sometime late November, if not December.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Well, that'll be right around when this podcast drops. So that's perfect timing. Hey. Cool. Well, I'll make sure to put links to the website that you mentioned for Snohomish, the Snohomish School District, so people can go check that out, because we definitely mentioned that. I'm definitely going to have you back for a future episode to dive deeper into some more of these topics, because we just kind of skimmed the surface today. But Thank you so much for spending some time talking a little bit about everything that you're doing and the journey that you're on. It's amazing to listen to. Yeah. So my last question that I always ask everybody is, what's your current I love it when for the world right now?
My current I love it when is rooted in that story of that little boy that no one wanted to listen to. And so I love it when people come to me. I love it when I'm able to help someone to solve some sort of a problem. Even when I was a kid, my mom said my favorite thing was solving puzzles. So I love it when I get this. I love it when I get to solve those cultural puzzles.
Fabulous. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.